If you have an artist, heterosexual artist, like Picasso, so then you can talk as much as you want about his female lovers, his muses, etc. However, if you want to bring up for discussion or to talk about the sexuality of a queer artist, the response has been up to present times, oh, no, that's irrelevant. And the reason being, in many cases, because the museum boards are very conservative and they are afraid to either create controversy or to lose funding. But the outcome of this is that the curators of the museums, of the exhibitions, they avoid any same-sex relationships in their exhibitions. And in doing so, what they're doing is they closet queer figures that should be admired.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I'm really excited because this is the first Gay and Lesbian review collaboration with the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. So a lot of cross-promoting happening here. Today, for the first Gay and Lesbian review Ivory Tower Boiler Room discussion, I have on a Gay and Lesbian review regular contributor, Ignacio Darnaude. So first, hi, Ignacio.
Hi, Andrew. How are you? Very excited
good.
to be here today.
Yes, it's wonderful. I'm so excited. So first, just for the listeners to know, you've been in the film business for over 2 decades. You left your position as head of international marketing for Disney and for Sony to develop what we're really here to dig into, which is this documentary series called Hiding in Plain Sight, Breaking the Queer Code in Art. And you started to really give so many lectures, and we'll talk about a YouTube channel that you launched that really lays out this vision. So yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
And I think my first question is, when I see in your resume that you are head of international marketing, that just boggles my mind, like the responsibilities that a job like that would carry. So are you allowed to reveal a little of what you were doing?
Absolutely. I mean, I actually am originally from Spain. I came here many years ago to go to USC Film School. And after that, I've been in the film business for over 2 decades. I was, as you said, head of international marketing for Disney first, and then for Sony Pictures. And my responsibility was to create all the campaigns, the posters, the trailers, the TV spots for all the movies that the studio released, from Spider-Man, Pirates of the Caribbean, the animated movies, etc. So that was, it was a huge job. Yes.
Yeah. And well, so Los Angeles compared to Spain, do you have a favorite of, the dynamic, especially, I guess it depends where in Spain you're from.
True. I'm from the south, from Seville, so which is weather-wise is similar. So that in a way is okay. But the lifestyle is so different. In LA is such a different culture. It's just literally, it couldn't be more different. But now that I've been here for so long, I feel that I've actually been longer in LA than in Spain now, which is kind of hard to fathom. Yeah.
So how long have you been in the LA area?
For over 30 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I came very young.
Yeah. Well, so as you were doing this work for Disney and for Sony, were you always in the background thinking of, oh, okay, I really need to dig into my love of queer art? Or like, where did the queer art fascination come from?
That's a great way to start talking about the project, because film was my original passion. That's what brought me here. That's what made me uproot myself from Spain. But art was always part of my DNA. I loved art. I went to exhibitions all over the world, but then like a decade ago, something happened. And all of a sudden art became first like a driving passion, and it ultimately became like a life mission. It just happened. It's just, how these things in life transform you. And I think it all started when I was traveling around the world and going to exhibitions. And I realized that many of the artists that I loved happened to be gay. But I'm not talking about the usual suspects, David Hockney or Keith Haring, but many artists that I responded to, but I didn't realize that they were gay until much later on. So this really, really got my interest peaked. And I said, let me research this. Why am I responding to them? And then I found out that throughout history, from Michelangelo all the way to present time, queer artists used secret gay codes in their work, and that there is gay imagery hiding in plain sight in works of art which are iconic and known the world over. And to me, when I found that, was such a revelation. It was a revolution in my mind. It was like a lightning strike struck me. And to the point that I left my job at Sony Pictures at the time. I was the executive vice president of international marketing, to pursue this project, which I call Breaking the Gay Code in Art, which you kind of alluded to it already, that encompasses the different projects, the articles that I write for the Gay and Lesbian Review, the lectures that I'm now giving on this topic, which is basically revealing the crucial importance of queer artists throughout history. And I'm giving these lectures in colleges, in LGBTQ centers, and via Zoom around the world. The YouTube channel that you also mentioned, called Breaking the Gay Code in Art, that where you can see for free all these lectures. And the Instagram page that I just started. And ultimately, with what I hope it will become the documentary series, Hiding in Plain Sight, Breaking the Queer Code in Art.
Yeah, well, it's so exciting, everything that you're talking about, and this mission of, like, we'll get into it. Ignacio has this really intriguing phrase of, you have this analogy of the don't ask, don't tell military policy, and kind of using that as a lens of understanding these secret codes in queer art. And like, we'll get into why you call it don't ask, like why you're thinking of don't ask, don't tell in this context. But I think before that, even, I love that you created an Instagram page, Breaking the Gay Code in Art. And Ignacio had confided in me about like whether there would be an audience, and I can just see how many people are absorbing this and like how fast it's already growing, because the visual is so stimulating on Instagram, right? Like that's why people go to Instagram, to see like visuals that pop out. And I think, is there one piece that you've put up on Instagram that you have, like one of the paintings or art pieces that really speak to, you think, your mission? Or
it's interesting because the Instagram, as you say, is a perfect medium for this project, for Breaking the Gay Code in Art, because it's all about art, about visual images. And so when I started, which was a month ago, my goal is to post 3 or 4 images a week. And what I do is, when you click on them, so I give you the story behind them, I decode them. And I find that fascinating. And I think people's eyes really open, and they look at art in different ways. For instance, there's so many examples. I talked, the latest post from this week is about an image that Andy Warhol did of Superman. So, you think, oh, great, Andy Warhol created this image because he's a powerful heterosexual icon. No, it was because Superman was a sexual turn-on for Warhol during his childhood. You know what I'm saying? So all of a sudden, every piece of work gets a complete different meaning when you really realize what's behind it. One of the visuals that really surprised people, there's a lesbian artist called Gluck that is not that famous. There's a very important portrait that she did of herself and with her lover. But before she was able to be open about her relationship with another woman who was a florist, instead of painting her lover, because she couldn't do that openly, she painted the flowers that her lover favored. So all these coded messages that to me is so moving to see the length that these artists had to go to express their desires, because society didn't allow them at the time, and how in doing so they transform mainstream culture, which to me is a very important piece of information.
Yeah, well, and I, am browsing now some of the images you've put, and I really especially love, Donatello's David. So
Yeah.
you go, Ignacio goes into the whole, like you say, decoding it. I love that use of the verb to decode and decode what's queer and
Exactly.
what's gay in this. And, with terminology, because I know when I was listening to your lectures, and like Ignacio said, they're all free on his YouTube channel, Breaking the Gay Code in Art, that you really lay out the importance of your terminology. So like,
Yes.
What to you is the main difference between saying breaking the gay code or breaking the queer code?
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I've gone through both terms, and there is a section of the community that doesn't like the word queer because it has a negative connotation. But really, in the last few years, it has become kind of a rallying cry to get the community together. And it has a different community of empowerment, pride. And that's why I am using more and more the term queer. And also because gay, in some cases, is limiting or maybe inaccurate. Let me give you an example. The term homosexual, the word homosexual, was not, for lack of better words, invented until the 19th century, the late 19th century. So can you call Michelangelo and Donatello gay or homosexuals? You know what I'm saying? So that's a tricky thing, but it can cause a whole kind of conversation. But queer is a bigger umbrella. It's those artists that went against the grain, and you know what I'm saying? So it's a more comfortable term to apply to, particularly when you're talking about people pre the invention of homosexuality. So,
yeah, and there's so many valences of understanding this same-sex desire, or in my own work, I really go for the term homoerotic because I just think for literature, art, media, any kind of media, there's so much to understand with homoerotic desire. And I think, why we understand each other's work so well is because we're both so interested in that unspoken, or
exactly,
what does the desire mean? And I think, yes, this conversation might get graphic, but I mean, I think that the work you're doing is so interesting because it is not that you're not going to the sexually explicit, but in a way you're not, like you're decoding. So it's kind of different. Like I sometimes think, have you ever thought about, okay, what would happen if I was looking at, say, gay porn images, or trying to decode like more highly sexual images?
well,
like do you, yeah,
like let's say Tom of Finland, but that to me, that's not part of my work. Because that's overtly sexual, and so there's nothing to decode. It's right there and there, the penises are there and the sex is there. So I talk about those instances in which the sexuality is referred, implied, or even in many cases is hiding in plain sight, and when you see the lectures and when you are made aware of this, I've seen people gasp and say, how come I never noticed this before? And now you cannot unsee it. And now you look at art differently. Because all of a sudden you understand what's behind it, and the longing from the artist and how he manifested it.
Yeah, well, and I love that you use Tom of Finland as like the more
whom I love.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Like we love these artists. But like you said, it's more overt, and there's something so exciting when you're giving lectures and like the whole audience knows this work.
Exactly.
Like even say Donatello, I mean, yes, it is a nude, David, but that there's other elements to think about with the culture of like boy male love in ancient Rome. Well, no, not in ancient Rome, in Italian society of the Renaissance. But I guess we could go all the way back to ancient Rome and then into ancient Greece, which I know you do, which I love, because I do agree with you that to understand the invention of homosexuality from the late Victorian period, they all turned to ancient Greek models. So like they were looking to art to understand same-sex desire. Like,
completely.
They were looking at sculptures, and you know, they were looking at banquet scenes. So with young,
but not only that, if you really get into it, like I've been researching this for over a decade, you realize that, for instance, the Greeks invented Greek gods, such as Ganymede, to justify the desire of an older man for a younger man. This is the origin of the Greek gods, you know, is to express what humans couldn't do it because it was maybe a little bit too risque, but because they were cushioned by the fact that they're in a fantasy world, all of a sudden they were accepted and it allowed them to express those desires. So it's fascinating.
Okay, hold on to that question because we'll be right back. But first, a word from our sponsor. The Ivory Tower Boiler Room is so happy to welcome Broadview Press as our official sponsor. Broadview Press is an independent academic publisher in the humanities that produces high-quality, pedagogically useful books for use in university and college classrooms. They publish in the humanities, mainly in English studies, writing, philosophy, and history. They always publish with an eye towards diversity, so there is a strong list of titles from women, people of color, and other authors from marginalized groups. In the summer of 2022, they launched their new Broadview anthology of American literature, which increases diversity in the classroom because it rethinks the American canon and breathes new life into the American Literary Survey. It's actually been called, quote, the new gold standard in the field. I love using Broadview Press text in my own classroom at Stony Brook University. I can't wait to use the new anthology of American literature when I have the opportunity. And for all of you out there, Broadview Press has given us the official code Ivory Tower for 20% off site-wide on broadviewpress.com. Again, that is code Ivory Tower for 20% off. Yeah, and there's so much context to the work you do, Ignacio, because not only are you shocking the audience of a well-known image that they didn't understand had queer coding to it, but you also have to give a historiography of like where the work came from, like why is it important Donatello's in the Renaissance? Like who was Donatello? The reception of who he was studying, and I'm sure we have antiquity to thank for his work. So yeah, like with Tom of Finland, it would be, yes, he has who he inherited his image and work from, but a very different, more like the eroticism discussion would be very different, right?
Like going on Tom of Finland, he was a huge fan of Michelangelo. And when, in fact, he has a great cheeky drawing in which the Michelangelo's David comes to life. But when you see his drawings in person, which I've seen many times, because I've seen, this may be like a little bit like problematic to say, but his drawings are as good as Michelangelo's. That's how good they are. The texture, the way he does everything, but because of the subject matter, he's relegated to this kind of niche of not necessarily considered a serious artist. This is changing. Like the price of his work is really increasing. So, but that's a different subject of how the overtly gay artists, the art world, while the art world, for instance, can see in a heterosexual sexual image, they could interpret that as, let's say, a metaphor for war, peace, virtue, etc., which you know from art history. If it's a gay sex image, it's immediately considered erotic, pornographic, and there is no leeway to be seen as anything but unlike the equivalent of a heterosexual art.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I guess to take from one of your Gay and Lesbian review articles, the one that I'm not going to say, I don't try to play favorites, but it definitely is the one that speaks to me the most, just because of my work with Whitman and bathers and that
Yes,
the nudity with
exactly.
homoeroticism, how desire functions. So Ignacio has this article, Artists Bathing the Gay Away. Again, another pun, kind of
Yes,
like the don't ask, don't tell. You have
yes.
bathing instead of praying the gay
Yeah.
away, like that wordplay. And you actually do start off with Michelangelo as an analysis. Right, the Battle of, is it
Kashina, Kashina.
Kashina?
Yeah, yeah.
So the Battle of Kashina. Do you want to give a little context for those
Yeah,
who
so
are
Michelangelo did
listening?
this draw. He was commissioned to do a drawing while Leonardo was doing another drawing for the same building. It was going to be in a public building. The project never came to be for different, because there was, and this is in Florida, because there was a political regime change, and all of a sudden these images wouldn't have the same resonance. But that's not the point. The point is that this drawing, it was supposed to be about a heroic battle scene. I mean, the Battle of Kashina. And what does he do? Instead, he does a drawing of these soldiers bathing naked in the river when they were caught unaware that the enemies were coming, I believe, from Pisa. So why did he do that? Very simple, because that was his way to express homoeroticism, the naked body, the male body, the muscles, which is what he was interested in. And this drawing became so iconic that there's a lot of histories of what happened to it. There's a story that one of his rivals, another queer artist, cut it in pieces and it gave it to different students. But the fact is that this drawing by Michelangelo is so important that has been used as an alibi for centuries by queer artists, meaning, oh no, I'm doing an image of bathers like Michelangelo. You know what I'm saying? So the fact that Michelangelo did it legitimizes this alibi that you can portray naked male bathers, when the reality is that you do it because you want to show your homoerotic desires in your work.
Yeah, well, and I think it's so fascinating when you get into your decoding and like why I think this work, I can't wait for this trajectory of the work you're doing, Ignacio, because we see this so much throughout society, but we can point to examples now of especially like even Americans' love of like masculinity in sports and
Yes,
like how the uniform fits the body, or even
yes,
bodybuilder culture. It's very apparent of like men competing against other men, looking at their bodies,
yes,
comparing the muscles with each other. And but to see that the way that they're viewing masculinity also has this other side of how homoerotic this is, but also when a queer artist takes hold of, say,
exactly,
American football, they're going to do
exactly,
something completely different with just, using that accepted image of masculinity and turning it
exactly,
on its head to express homoeroticism
exactly.
and let it just
And
flow and fluctuate. Yeah.
I love that because if you see one of my lectures in which I talk about the queer images hiding in plain sight, I talk about how many queer artists, what they did is exactly what you said, which is they appropriated socially accepted images, such as of icons, such as soldiers, sailors, bathers, athletes, wrestlers. Those are images that everybody accepts, and they portray them with a patina of homoeroticism, but because they're socially accepted images, they managed to get away with it. And that's being used from the 16th century until today. And for instance, there's a very famous illustrator after Norman Rockwell, is probably the most important, and he was gay, J.C. Leyendecker. And that's what he did. You know what I'm saying? His images was all about masculinity, like polo shirts, but it was always a sexual tension between these men in closed spaces. But because they represent the American value system and the sportsmen, etc., nobody questions them.
Yeah.
But now, a century later, we see them and it's like, hello, I mean, this is the most homoerotic thing I've ever seen. And same thing with patriotism. If in this talk about the hiding in plain sight, I mentioned how during the war, some of the acts were so homoerotic that it's just shocking that you see them today, you have to laugh, you know? So
Yeah.
it's just funny.
Wait, and who is that artist again, Ignacio?
The illustrator I just mentioned?
The illustrator. Yeah.
J.C. Linebacker.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And for everyone who's listening, what I'm going to do for this episode is on Ivory Tower Boiler Room's Instagram. I'm going to put all the paintings that Ignacio is discussing. That way,
Perfect.
I think for a discussion like this, we all need to look at the visuals. So yeah, head over for that. But, okay, so we've talked about Michelangelo, and I think that, before we get to someone who I think you just really dig into deeply is Thomas Eakins.
Yeah.
And the swimming hole. Wait, it's the swimming hole, right?
Yeah.
Is the painting. Okay.
It has different titles, but the swimming hole is the most commonly accepted.
Yeah, I was just thinking when usually I refer to it in my writing with Walt Whitman and Eakins' fascination with Whitman and the Leaves of Grass 28 Bathers Song of Myself section. But and we'll talk. I really can't wait to hear your opinion about what he did with actual live models. But like to get into thinking about how a lot of these artists relied on male models, right? For who they were thinking about, actual bodies they wanted to see in person. Like in your work, did most of these queer male artists and female artists, which I think would be a different story, but because of how they're accepted in certain art institutions, but did they rely on mostly live models for their paintings, or did they not need models?
It all depends. So to answer your question, one thing that from the Renaissance, this idea of the academic drawings of models as a way to improve your technique, etc., became all the way to really present time. This is something that they still do. And those were with live models. And in those classes, because they were nude models, female students were not accepted. That's why there were really not so many female artists at the time. And what is interesting is, and I'm going to be posting on Instagram very soon, in fact, this week, how many queer artists use these academic studies to express their homoeroticism. Yes, they were a study of a male nude, great, fantastic, but when you see them, they are so sexually charged that they're like the most gorgeous thing. Sometimes they have two men interacting, and it's like, oh, no, but this is an academic study. You know what I'm saying? So, it gives them the patina of respect, So that was another alibi used by the artist. And other artists like Eakins did use live models. In fact, his students. In fact, he took pictures of himself, Eakins, I believe it was his partner, Samuel Murray, naked, beautiful photos, and his students, which caused a big controversy. He was a very controversial figure. And when this painting that you mentioned, the swimming hole, which is one of the most beloved American paintings, that was commissioned by somebody. So what Eakins did is he basically loaded it with codes to give it a sense of respect, because what he was doing is showing his young students naked on top of a rock. But, one of them is posing like Donatello's David. So that gives it a classical feel to it. Another one is painting like a very famous Roman sculpture. You know what I'm saying? So this is all giving a sense of respectability to make the nudes more acceptable. But when you start decoding the painting, you see that Eakins has painted himself swimming towards this young naked men. And if you get even deeper, you realize that this painting is really a visual expression of a Walt Whitman poem about love for young men. So this painting has so many layers of codes, which if you see it unaware, you say, oh, it's a great painting. But all of a sudden, when you analyze it, it has a complete different meaning and you realize how powerful it is. And it's interesting because Eakins, he tried to make it palatable, but when the rich man who commissioned it received it, he was shocked and he rejected it. Mm-hmm. And he said, no, please give me something that I can donate to a museum later on, you know? So in spite of all his attempts to hide the homoeroticism in the swimming hole, it's all there, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I love that you start from the literary to the painting. Well, the literary to Eakins's young nude models, to the painting, and all these layers are fascinating because it really talks about what you get to in all of your articles, but also in your lectures, all the work you're doing, Ignacio, which is this type of queer fantasy. And you kind of have answered one of my questions, which is like, if you were actually analyzing film, how different of a project would this be? But I feel like it would be different because, say, like someone put Eakins' swimming hole, like filmed young men nude running around and frolicking. Like, this sounds like the star of, you know, some porn film of the current day.
In the early history of film, their homosexuality, it was all coded. My partner has a blog on the history of classic movies, and when you see some scenes, for instance, North by Northwest, the Hitchcock, the Martin Landau character is gay, but it's coded. But when you say, wait, what was that? You know, they couldn't show it over there, but it's there. And in the Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers movies, there's always this gay friend who is the flaming queen. You know what I'm saying? And it's addressed as she sometimes. It's crazy, but it's coded. You know what I'm saying? It cannot be said overtly either.
Yeah, it reminds me of Hitchcock has so many of those coded films, like Strangers on a Train. And
oh my God.
The two men, like
the tension between them, you know?
Yes, the sexual tension, the touch that goes on. Well, but that's for others out there. I know they're doing that. They're doing that work. And but I think to get into another aspect, I'm just going to use an anecdote, which is recently I've just been so fascinated with these podcasts on Playgirls history, just because it was this big feminist like awakening of, okay, here is nude men instead of nude women. But you know, the demographic that ended up being the ones who were actually buying the majority of the magazines weren't straight women. They were actually men interested in men, which, you know, it's a fascinating though history. But the reason I just bring that up is because, you know, who do you think, and this is probably, there's not going to be one answer, but it's why I love to ask it, which is, you know, you've talked about the audience being surprised about these queer coding and works of art they know, but who do you think most of these artists who you are bringing to light, their intended audience? Do you think their intended audience is the audience that actually really values that work, or are the ones who actually know the codes that they're putting out in the ether for us all? And now a message from the Gay and Lesbian Review.
Hello, listeners. This is Stephen Hemrick, the publisher of the GNLR, here with a special offer just for you. For those of you who aren't familiar with the GNLR, let me provide a little background. The GLR is a bi-monthly magazine of history, culture, and politics that publishes essays in a wide range of disciplines, as well as a slew of reviews of books, plays, and movies, and a number of special features such as artists' profiles and the popular Art Memo column. Each issue brings you consistently intelligent, lively, thought-provoking articles focused on a unifying theme and brings together the leading minds on the topic. You won't find a lot about the latest dating fads or fashion trends, though you might find articles about online dating as a social phenomenon or the gay influence on 20th century fashion. For example, the theme of the current issue is Queens and Kings, and it features an article by Andrew Holleran about Truman Capote's relationships with glamorous women, the women he called his swans. Now for the special offer. When you subscribe, you'll receive a free copy with any print or digital subscription. That's 7 issues instead of 6. Visit glreview.org. That's glreview.org. Click subscribe and enter promo code ITBR for your free issue. And as an added bonus, you'll receive online access to all archived issues of the magazine.
That is hard to give you one answer because each artist had its own rationale. For instance, one of the ways to cope with the repression from society is some gay artists had what I call double lives. So they had mainstream work, which they showed, museums, whatever. And then they had their queer work, which they only circulated among an intimate circle of friends. And this is very common with, for instance, the photographer George Platt Lyons, who, he was a fashion photographer for Vogue and magazines like that. But at the same time, he was doing these revolutionary photos of male nudes that he couldn't show during his lifetime, but he circulated with a circle of friends, and they ended up in the Kinsey Institute. And now, 7 decades later, they are really, really considered like revolutionary, So it really depends on which artist you talk about to figure out how that works into their work, how they do it and for whom they do it,
Like each has its own
yes,
key
exactly,
understanding, like a treasure map. Like you have to kind of
yes, it is.
decode the puzzle for each
Exactly.
of these artists. I
It
get
is.
that. Yeah.
It is.
And like to follow up with that, I know I had hinted at you have this whole discussion of don't ask, don't tell. And I was thinking, well, this is a great opportunity because for you to explain, like, what do you really mean by using that don't ask, don't tell military policy as an analogy for the work you're doing, and to understand who these codes, these queer codes, but also that audience that the artist really wants to speak to, but can't really voice.
Yeah. So that goes really to the core of my project, breaking the queer code, the gay code in art, because what I want to do is I want to shatter this false belief that queer art and art from queer artists is just a footnote in history. In the school, I'm sure nobody teaches you that queer art has been with us from the beginning of times in all media, from the Egyptian tombs to the Greek vases to the Renaissance sculptures to modern art. Not only that queer artists have revolutionized mainstream culture throughout history. And to see an example of that, just look at the list of the most valuable or expensive pieces of art in history, and you will see how many of them were created by queer artists. For instance, the recent auction sale of the Marilyn Monroe by Warhol for nearly $200 million. However, in spite of this impact, if you ask the general population to name any queer artist, like I had for my documentary, I interviewed people outside of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art and asked them, okay, can you name any gay artist? And 99% of the time, they had a blank expression. They can't name any. And that goes to this point you asked me, which is this idea of don't ask, don't tell, or what I call don't say gay, the erasure of queerness in art. So last month, I gave a conference, which you can see for free in the YouTube channel at the University of San Francisco as part of the Conference on Social Equity. And the title was Don't Say Gay, the Erasure of Queerness in Art. And what I did is talk about how historically museums have erased the queerness in exhibitions. And by that, I mean the following. If you have an artist, heterosexual artist like Picasso, So then you can talk as much as you want about his female lovers, his muses, etc. However, if you want to bring up for discussion or to talk about the sexuality of a queer artist, the response has been up to present times, oh, no, that's irrelevant. And the reason being, in many cases, because the museum boards are very conservative and they are afraid to either create controversy or to lose funding. But the outcome of this is that the curators of the museums, of the exhibitions, they avoid any same-sex relationships in their exhibitions. And in doing so, what they're doing is they closet queer figures that should be admired. Mm-hmm. And I have so many examples of this. And if you want, I can give you a couple so I can tell you of how the museums have done that. Are you okay with that?
Yeah. And I think this is really good because this is the whole heart
point
of your mission. Yeah,
exactly.
Yes.
And just to give you a couple of, I could be talking for an hour just about examples of how the museums have erased this. Let's say Jasper Jones. Jasper Jones, who just turned 92, is probably the most important American living artist. And he had a life-changing relationship with Robert Rauschenberg for 7 years, 1954 to 61, a relationship that transformed their lives and their work. Well, guess what? This relationship has not been discussed openly in the art world. It's always in sotto voce, not talk about it until recently this year at the retrospective of Jasper Jones. And I think it is because the curator of this exhibition is queer, But in 2017, I went to New York to see the Robert Rauschenberg retrospective at MoMA. And, when he talked about Jasper Jones, he described their relationship as an intense friendship. And I kind of was appalled by that. And they, of course, they had a whole explanation on Rauschenberg's son, because he had a child from a relationship with a woman, which was, I think it only lasted a few months. You know what I'm saying? But that they talk about. You know what I'm saying? And so this is an examples. Or for instance, when MoMA also had their first retrospective of Andy Warhol, they excluded all his early queer groundbreaking work, as if they had been created by somebody else. So, and I have examples of that on how the Whitney, for instance, when they did an exhibition called The American Century, that was really a landmark exhibition, they ignored all queer artists. They only referred to them as part of the AIDS play, So basically, they either made invisible queer artists or they stigmatized them, So as a consequence of this erasure, to this day, many queer artists have avoided the queer label because they're afraid that it's gonna displace any other factor of their work. It's gonna affect how they receive their work by critics, by the public, even the price of their work, And consequently, there is a lack of visibility and lack of positive images in the community.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you laid that out, because it's also that fear that gay or bi or, any queer actor has on a high profile stage to come out publicly because they're afraid they're not going to have job opportunities. I know there are, like, I'm sure you see too, there's artists now who wear their authenticity on their sleeve. And I think that that's the inspiring part, right?
Yes.
Like, I wanted to ask you, like, is your work playing into the need for that authenticity, the need for more, queer images to be out there, the discussions to be open, right? The closets to be flung off their hinges. Like, is that the...
For sure.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the ultimate goal, which is also happening already. And things are changing. Museums are finally acknowledging the queer heritage in their collections. The Tate did a seminal exhibition a few years ago called Queer British Art. And that has happened. I saw one in Madrid at the Prado, in Taiwan, in Brazil. So that is happening more and more. And what is happening also is that I live in LA, where there's a very thriving culture in galleries, in art galleries, and they are very embracing of queer artists. And what is happening is a little by little, these queer artists, they're gaining name, they gain reputation, and now they are in museums. Like the Whitney had an exhibition of Salvatore, a queer artist who, a few years earlier was only in a gallery, but now he's at the Whitney, So little by little, also with the addition of queer curators, that is happening more and more, thank God.
Yeah, but like the, future docuseries, but even all the lectures that are out there, your articles, they're part of this grassroots, this need for just academics, art critics, anyone who is in media to really be speaking openly, because it's this type of grassroots work where it comes from the ground up, and then eventually these, big budget art institutions realize the need to, they have an audience that is going to want to see it, and their board is going to invest in it. And
exactly.
But all of that doesn't happen if these conversations don't exist. And
exactly. Yeah. And that really goes to what I would hope for my project, Breaking the Gay Code in Art and the docuseries would be, which is the LGBTQ community needs now more than ever positive images, role models, because gay rights are once again under attack. And so it's very important for the young queer generations, and frankly, for everyone, to be aware that in spite of the repression, queer artists have revolutionized mainstream culture. And when I give my lectures and I see and I decode this work, and I see the young people's eyes widening up when they realize that, or they even gasp, and I tell them, you come from a magnificent lineup of queer trailblazers, which you didn't know, you were not aware, because nobody told you, they were hiding it. And this is very empowering. And I love something that the gay activist Larry Kramer said. He said, you are not a community until you have a history. So it's very important to bring this history forward, like I'm doing, and hopefully with the documentary series, because that is what is going to bring representation, visibility, and social equity for the queer community.
Exactly. Well, and also why now there are publications who are investing in queer art history books. And especially, like, I always love when I see a new queer literature book come out. And but like you said, I was joking early in this interview about the shockingness of maybe queer visual explicit images, but we don't think about that when we see nudes of straight people, like straight couples. Like, it's never like, and it's in the art sphere and it's considered highbrow art. I think when we realize, oh, queer art is also highbrow, and they can be nude, there might not be nudity, but it's all part of our history. Like, all of these images are part of an archive, and archives are so important because they give us an understanding of our culture. So, this is everything tying back to understanding what you're doing with queer culture.
And one thing that people who are listening to this may not be aware is that this, you mentioned the ancient Greece, where same-sex desire was accepted, the male nude at the time represented the ultimate values of mankind. So that's why there were statues everywhere. But then when Christianity came in the 4th century, that was put the caboose on that, and that disappeared. And then from then on, there were laws. It started with the Christianity that for male homosexual acts were, penalized with the death penalty. So imagine the impact that this had on art. So from then on, the queer artists had to choose between being in the closet or being out with their art and their lives, and risk rejection and persecution, because these laws have been, active until present time. I mean, the criminalization of male homosexuality in the UK lasted until 1967. Yeah. And today, there are over 70 countries that still criminalize homosexuality. So this is not a historical issue. I mean, it is, but it's a modern day issue in many places. So we really have to be aware of that in many cases, many countries, artists have still forced to use these codes because they cannot express themselves openly.
Exactly. And yeah, even in the States, we have so few states actually have secured LGBTQ rights in law with equal rights. So yeah, no, you're right. It's the coding is still happening, definitely. And at the same time, we also see the openness and like those who are able to take a lot of risks because they have more of a cushion of security. So yeah, I think understanding all of the spectrum is what your work does. We get to understand the visual of queer art in really nuanced ways. So, I want to thank you for that, Ignacio, because
welcome.
It's
so really important. It's like I said, it became my life mission, and that's what I'm doing. So to all I want is for people to open people's eyes, and that's what I want, and to have people look at art in different ways and understand what's behind it, and understand how queer artists, in spite of this repression, were able to break the code and to do it in, like, for instance, with the classical images that you mentioned, but even with religious images, during Christianity, that where nudity was simple. Queer artists managed to create very sexually charged, provocative images of Cain and Abel, Saint Sebastian, Adam from Adam and Eve, even Jesus.
Oh yes, I was going to say
I have a whole presentation on that, a lecture that you can see. So, and why is that? They were accepted because of the sacred subject matter, but they are so homoerotic that it's actually funny from today's standards.
Yeah, no, and like it ties back to the context of what privileged, or I'll say heteronormative, right?
Oh yeah,
straight identified culture, like the norms of that culture. For those who don't know what heteronormative means, that if they say, okay, well, these half nude men who are in a locker room, well, that's for an ESPN reel. Like, no, that's okay. But okay, if that same context is in a party scene on the beach, of out identified gay men on Fire Island. No, that's too much, right?
Yeah.
But who's getting to, who's making these rules? And I think what your work is doing is contesting that. It's also just, again, going back to the metaphor of the closet is so important for breaking down this queer coding in art. So I want, as we wrap up, Ignacio, to just, any last thoughts before I have you throw out all of your ways for everyone to follow you?
No, I mean, it's just, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. In essence, Breaking the Gay Code in Art, which is the title for the Instagram page, the YouTube channel, and for the documentary series, is just to showcase the huge importance of queer artists throughout history. They were not a footnote. They were there from the very beginning of time until today. And I want to give them the opportunity in modern times to express their lives fully, to do things that they were not able to do in their time, or to contextualize. And to me, I feel it gives me chills to be able to explain what this queer artist was intending to do, which maybe at the time was not possible. But today, we can finally embrace it and say it out loud.
Yes, say it out loud. Let them live outside the closet.
Yeah.
Give them their full agency and their queer humanity, which they well deserve.
Exactly.
And they need that respect, in my opinion. So, okay. Well, where can everyone follow you, Ignacio, your Instagram handles, and your YouTube channel?
So the YouTube channel is called Breaking the Gay Code in Art, and the Instagram page is Breaking the Gay Code in Art, as simple as that. And if you go to the YouTube channel, you see all the lectures, and in the Instagram page, you'll see all the images that I've been talking about. And if you go to the Gay and Lesbian Review magazine, which I find is an essential publication for queer culture.
Yes.
That's why I'm so excited. This is one of the
we're holding up two different
This is one of the 4 featured stories I have written so far. This is actually the cover story was on the secret muse, African American model for the artist Singer Sargent. So you can see these articles in the Gay and Lesbian Review website too.
Yep.
So this is all part of that process, of that project.
Yeah, and also you can follow the Gay and Lesbian Review on Instagram at the GL Review. I'm gonna have more of these Gay and Lesbian Review interviews to come. I can't wait to see. Ignacio, you are the first of many, so thank you for being the inaugural interviewee. So yeah, this was so wonderful. I can't wait for everyone to follow you. And like I said, Ignacio, this is going to be the beginning of a very exciting project. So definitely come back on. Cannot wait to see what happens.
Thank you, Andrew.
And hopefully soon, no pressure, but I'll have you on eventually when, a docu-series is.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you to all out there. And again, make sure you go to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room Instagram to see all of the images, Ignacio. Well, that and also our lovely faces from the interview. But you can see all of the paintings too. Okay. Thank you, Ignacio.
Thank you.
And bye to everyone out there. Thank you so much for listening to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Welcome to the fall season. The Ivory Tower Boiler Room is a public humanities podcast where we interview writers, scholars, performers, and artists. Episodes air on Mondays. I am Andrew Rimby, the executive director. I'm so happy to welcome my team, Mary DePippi, our chief contributor, Kimberly Dallas, our editor, and an amazing fall group of interns. Thank you to this team. Please follow the Ivory Tower Boiler Room on TikTok and Instagram at Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Easy to remember. Our Twitter is at Ivory Boiler Room. And we have a whole new design for our Patreon. It is called the Ivory Tower Boiler Room Cafe because you're joining us and eavesdropping on our conversations that are unedited videos of all of our Ivory Tower Boiler Room episodes, as if you're eavesdropping in a cafe, overhearing the conversation. Well, talking about overhearing a conversation, hi, Mary.
Hello, Andrew, and hello, everyone. I'm Mary DePippi, the host of True Crime in Academia, a true crime podcast that is focused mainly on the crimes committed by and to those in the field of academia. Episodes air every Tuesday at noon. You can follow True Crime in Academia on Instagram and TikTok at True Crime in Academia and on Twitter at TC in Academia because Twitter hates extra characters, as we all know. And as Andrew alluded to earlier, we have a Patreon, and True Crime in Academia has exclusive bonus episodes for subscribers. As a true crime enthusiast, I don't necessarily like to pigeonhole my true crime interests. So over on the Patreon, I cover some of the more high profile cases not related to academia, such as the murder of JonBenet Ramsey and the case of Casey Anthony. So if you want access to videos like that, go over to patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room and become a subscriber.
Thank you all for joining us. And here's to an amazing fall season.
Whoop,
Bye.
whoop.
Bye, everyone.